Hi again then guys, and welcome to another instalment of Beards and Cars, of course my podcast style series where we do countdowns sometimes, predictions, discussions, and this is just that, a discussion on this occasion, and it's an interesting one because it goes deeper than many people think of it as being, or at least it can. And of course a lot of these discussions that we have tend to be more about why petrol heads think a certain way or act a certain way rather than just what they do. Because we already know what we do it all the time, we're all very similar despite our differences. We have our likes, our dislikes, our passions, things which we would say that we hate sometimes. And this kind of speaks to that because there's a particular word which tends to get bandied about a lot by the car community especially, but also when it comes to movies or books or pretty much anything you can find people who say this, and that is overrated. It's a popular word these days, and you could have a whole discussion on why it's more popular than ever, the current climate of pop culture, but that's for another time. This is more specifically whether or not certain cars are overrated, and also what cars are overrated. Is it a fact-based thing, or is it an opinion-based thing? Because it's kind of a murky grey area, because it could be used either way, so which one is correct? Well, I'm not going to presume to tell you the absolute this must be done way. But when I was thinking about this, these were my thoughts. And of course, you can post your thoughts down below, have the discussion back and forth. That's the whole point of many of these Beards and Cars installments. So, first of all, can a car be overrated? Let's just get that question out of the way immediately. I would say yes. Yes, it can be. It can be. I think that pretty much anything, be it food, cars, books, whatever, once you start comparing a large number of things within a set category, then by definition some of them could potentially be overrated. But where it gets grey, I think, is how people use the word, because it gets bandied about way too much. It's one of these words that's like a trigger word, like a clickbaity kind of thing, but it's almost like conversational clickbait, where people say it more so to incite a response, rather than to actually make a legitimate point. And again, that applies a lot these days. That's the way people tend to argue. They tend to try to rile other people up rather than reason with them. So, with that being said, given that I would say we can have overrated cars, how do we know if something is overrated? Because for me, for instance, the first thing that comes to mind when I think of the word overrated when it comes to vehicles, cars specifically, is Nissan GT-R. That's the first thing that pops into my mind. The second thing is probably the Bugatti Veyron. So with those two things in mind, let's consider those as examples. Are they overrated? And if not, what cars are? Well, to me, I think there are two stages that have to be done in order for a car to be legitimately overrated. And the funny thing is, people throw the word around so much, but really don't think about what's required for a car to be categorized as overrated. The way I see it, and of course other people can see it differently, is that the first step toward a car being genuinely overrated, and this is pretty much a necessity as far as I'm concerned, is that the majority of the community, in this case the petrolhead community, must agree that this particular vehicle is the best thing since sliced bread. Not necessarily the best thing out there, but definitely one of the best. But it's often the best. That tends to be how people deal with things these days. It's either the absolute best of something or the absolute worst. Very little in between anymore. So, that's the first parameter. Now that alone is a difficult hurdle to reach, because you will never get the entire petrolhead community to agree with anything beyond the fact that we all love cars. Anything else, there's always somebody who disagrees, and even with that you'll have people who will troll just for the sake of it. So, first of all, you have to have at least more than 50% of the community agree that a particular vehicle is brilliant or even the best. So, does the Veyron or the GT-R qualify? Well, immediately, I would say that disqualifies the Veyron, because I would say, now more so than ever, no, the Veyron does not have a predominantly positive view. Most people don't care about the Veyron anymore. Many people never did. Some people still do. Some people hate the car. Some people just, as I said, don't care for it. So by definition, I would say that from what I've seen, at the very least, no, the car does not have a majority vote in the positive section. It has more of a neutral kind of tone. So, by definition, that immediately stops the argument. The Veyron is not overrated because it's not rated anymore. People don't even take any notice of it. Now, if you raise that same question back when it was released, that's a much more interesting discussion, because you've got stuff like the Koenigsegg CCR, the Zonda, the McLaren F1 still at the time. You could have a much more legitimate argument of whether or not the Veyron was overrated. Now, though, I just don't see it as even a conversation anymore. What then about the GTR? Well, the GTR actually does pass the first test, because it is a car which the vast majority of the petrolhead community, be it JDM fans, whatever, most of us, if we are honest, do agree that the GTR is a brilliant car. A brilliant performance car. It's nearly perfect as far as its all-round ability. Some would even say is perfect. And that, of course, ties into this whole discussion. So easily the vast majority of people love the car. And of course, once you include liking the car, anything that's any kind of positive view contributes toward that side of the argument, of rating the car highly. Now, of course, the word itself, overrated, implies that there's a certain point where rating something highly can kind of overflow the cup and be too much. It's overrated. It's too highly rated and it cannot live up to it. That, again, being the definition, brings me to the second hurdle. And this is what many people forget about when they call something overrated. Because when many people say the word overrated, what they actually mean is something more along the lines of kind of talked about too much, or I don't like it as much as many people, or some kind of word that would embody that instead. But what overrated means is it has to be something that's rated really highly, but actually doesn't achieve that. And therein lies the problem of a GTR actually being overrated, because I would say it isn't, because it is rated highly by the majority of people, but it can actually achieve those things. It is as fast as people claim. It is as good around the track. It is as good value for money. It is as practical. So it's not overrated because it can actually do all of those things that people say about it. Now, of course, sometimes you get claims which are over the top, but I'm talking about a percentage of the conversation being high enough that the car actually does achieve what people say it can do. So by definition, as far as I'm concerned, and the way I see it, it cannot be an overrated car. So what would be then? Because it's a very strange definition, at least the one that I'm using, to actually fit within that. It's got to be something that the majority of people love, but at the same time is not as good as the majority of people think. That's kind of an awkward thing to actually find a car that fits into. You might think of one or two immediately that you would think qualify, but when you really think about it, a lot of them probably don't. They actually do tend to achieve what people think. Now, one of the only examples I could think of is, let's say in Forza 4, for instance, with the 1 mile drag event. In that particular event, if you're talking unlimited class, most people would say that the Ultima GTR is pretty much the best thing out there. It's a not quite unanimous, but definitely overwhelmingly positive argument. Many people, most people, in fact, would agree with that. The simple fact is, all of those people are wrong, because the fastest car in Forza 4 for 0 to 60 and 0 to 200, or 0 to 100 I should say, is in fact the Dodge Dart. Now that doesn't mean it's going to beat the Ultima over the full mile, but it means that factually speaking, the Ultima is not the fastest car in the game. It's just a fact. And yet so many people would say that it is. So under my ruling of the two stages, which of course, as I said, different people could have different ones, but under that explanation, let's say, it does qualify as an overrated car. But even then, the funny thing is, it's not overrated in every way, because the Ultima is an overwhelmingly fast car and it is a brilliant track car. So it's not that it's completely overrated, it's just specifically overrated as a drag car. It's not the best, as many people would say it is, because there are simply other ones which are, say, faster to 60 or faster to 200, or something might have equal top speed or maybe slightly higher. You know, an Ultima Aero, a Hennessy Venom, a Veyron Supersport, an EB110. So across the board, you have to be so specific that the ironic thing, and I think this is the hilariously poetic thing about this whole discussion, is that under most circumstances, the only title, the only word that is actually overrated in the petrolhead world is the word overrated. Because everyone uses it, and yet it's almost always used wrong. So the word itself is actually overrated, and it's overused. So although you could certainly go back and forth on this and have wildly different viewpoints, and also how you would describe how you personally use that word, and that's where most of the distinction comes, because people don't mean the same thing when they use the word. But again, that's the problem. You know, we all use the same language, and that's why words have definitions, so that if you say something, the other person can know that's what you mean. You don't pass someone, for instance, a £10 note and say, oh, that means 20, because I mean it as 20. Try that in a shop, see how far it gets you. The point of words is to convey an idea, to convey a thought. So if you say a word but you mean something else, you are doing a disservice to your own argument, and many people don't realise that. So I would say that overrated is by definition the most overrated word there is, pretty much. There might be one that's even more, but I think that one is probably number one, which is kind of ironic. In fact, it's very ironic. So that's it for this particular discussion. I just thought it was a fun one to have, and as I said, a lot of people probably won't like the discussion because it's not like, oh, Nissan GTR, number 9, Bugatti Veyron, number 8, McLaren F1, you know, whatever. It's not that kind of video. It could have easily been, but by my own definition, half the list would have been wrong anyway. So I think it's much more of an interesting occasion to talk about why we do things as petrolheads, the way we think, even when we don't personally realise it sometimes, and to talk about why we are the way we are, and also how to improve ourselves. You know, actually try using words that you mean instead of words that sound good. These trigger words, these clickbaity words which have seeped into general conversation. Get it out of there. Mean what you say, because when you mean what you say, it has more value. People take more notice of it, and it actually has more weight as an argument. Even if the argument is wrong, your reasoning could be good. Just like when you do math at school. You could get the wrong answer, but if you show the right working out, the teacher can still give you some credit. Whereas if you just give the wrong answer with no context, you force the hand. They have to fail you on the question. Likewise with the discussion, at least if you can understand why you use the language that way or why you have a certain attitude, people can at least understand where you're coming from, even if they don't agree with you. And of course that's not going to change anytime soon. It's not an overnight thing, but I think it's a cool conversation to have. But that's it for this installment. Of course, I will see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.